In Magic, when a spell costs 12 mana, you tend to get something pretty incredible, as you should for such a big investment. Today happens to be the first day of the 12th month of the year, and because of that, I sort of casually researched 12 mana cards, not really expecting for there to be enough with top finishes. After all, there are only 16 such cards, but I was proved wrong, and fittingly enough, 12 of those cards have at least one top 8, and there are also 12 days of Christmas, so I decided let's just make the first MTG top 12 ever to really kick off the holiday season. This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. If you want Magic singles or sealed product, use my link in the description. Here's a quick reminder on how I rank cards in these videos. A first tier top 8 is worth 2 points. This includes events like Pro Tours. And a second tier top 8 is worth 1 point. This includes events like regional championships. At number 12, it's Icebreaker Kraken. For 10 generic and 2 blue, it's an 8/8 that costs 1 less to cast for each of your snow lands, and when it enters, artifacts and creatures target opponent controls don't untap during that player's next untap step. You can also return 3 snow lands to your hand to bounce the Kraken. Many of the 12 mana cards on this list have a built-in cost reduction effect like the Kraken does, so that they can be cast more easily. So if you have snow lands, it kind of feels like they produce 2 mana apiece to help you cast this, and you get a pretty big creature that can even lock the opponent out of most game actions on their next turn. Bouncing it to your hand is a thing sometimes too, though obviously bouncing those snow lands will make it harder to actually recast it in the future. While in Standard, it saw play in some mono-blue control decks that ran lots of snow lands and snow payoffs like Ascendant Spirit. It also has a single top 8 in a modern Calibrated Blast deck. That's a card that does damage equal to the mana value of a revealed non-land card, and the way these decks are constructed, anytime you cast Calibrated Blast, you either hit a card with Cascade, which will cascade into another Calibrated Blast, or just another Calibrated Blast, or a card with a high mana value that will do a bunch of damage, and the Kraken is used as one of the high mana value cards in the deck sometimes, although it's largely been hedged out by even more expensive cards, and doesn't have any top 8s in any format since 2022. At number 11, it's Iname As One. It has the same total score as Icebreaker Kraken, but it has a higher average finish in its top 8s, so it got the higher spot on the list. For a generic 2 black and 2 green, it's an 8/8, and when it enters, if you cast it from your hand, you can search your library for a spirit and put it onto the battlefield, and when Iname dies, you can exile it, and if you do, you reanimate a spirit. So Iname can definitely be powerful if you have a bunch of spirits, potentially giving you a 3-for-1, but 12 mana with no cost reduction is a pretty big challenge. Now, if you've regularly watched my content, you might know that Iname As One has made some appearances on MTG Top 10 Worst videos, like Worst 10 Plus Mana, just last year, but Iname has officially graduated from that list by putting up 2 top 8s this year, and putting up top 8s is enough to prevent a card from appearing on worst lists. Now, I will say, Iname making top 8s has absolutely nothing to do with what Iname actually does. Instead, it has everything to do with the fact that it's simply a black and green card with a super high mana value. That's because both the top 8s it's achieved came in modern Necrodominance decks. This powerful enchantment lets you pay any amount of life to draw cards during your end step, and this deck looks to turn both life and cards into really exploitable resources, and it can do this with cards like Nourishing Shoal, Soul Spike, and March of Wretched Sorrow. Those spells can be free or at an extreme discount if you exile a card or cards from your hand, and the Shoal gains you life equal to the mana value of a green card you exile, meaning it can gain you 12 life with Iname, making it so you can draw even more cards with Necrodominance, and Iname also has the benefit of being exilable to both the Spike and the March, the former of which can help you kill the opponent and gain life, while the latter is a removal spell that gains you a ton of life. In both cases, that means you can draw more cards. However, while Necrodominance decks have continued to be quite good in Modern and Legacy, Iname doesn't tend to be a part of those decks anymore, as the Nourishing Shoal angle has been abandoned in favor of a more streamlined mono-black deck, so Iname's very brief moment in the sun is very likely over. At number 10, it's It That Betrays. You had to know that a high mana value list would be packing Magic's biggest creature type, the Eldrazi. For 12 generic mana, this Eldrazi is an 11/11 with Annihilator 2. That means when it attacks, your opponent sacrifices 2 permanents, And that's extra good in this case, because whenever an opponent sacrifices a non-token permanent, you put that card onto the battlefield under your control. Annihilator is already really strong, but It That Betrays makes it even more impressive, since you'll steal any non-token permanent your opponent sacrifices. If your opponent happens to sacrifice a permanent for any non-Annihilator reason, you'll also gain control of it. 12 mana is a lot though, and as such, no one ever actually cast this for that cost. Instead, its top 8s have all come in Legacy Reanimator decks, which can bring this big Eldrazi back for 1 mana with Reanimate. Being able to attack with this as early as turn 2 and just steal all of your opponent's lands is pretty absurd. However, there are better Reanimator targets these days, ones that have immediate enters triggers or the ability to draw you a million cards, or both, and It That Betrays hasn't been featured as a reanimation target since 2011. At number 9, it's Lumbering Megalsoth. For 10 generic and 2 green, it's an 8/8 trampler that enters tapped, but it costs 1 generic less to cast for each counter among players and permanents. Unlike most counter payoffs, the Megalsoth counts the number of counters and looks at all boards and all players, so it's surprisingly easy to lower its mana cost in the right deck. The only 60 card paper format that Fallout cards like this one are legal in are Legacy and Vintage, and the Megalsoth has seen some play in the former in Dark Depths decks. As you can probably guess from the deck being named for it, it's all about getting Dark Depths into play, and it can do it really consistently thanks to land tutors and card draw. While the deck's plan A is to get the 2020 Avatar out of the depths using Thespian Stage or Vampire Hexmage to remove the counters, the Megalsoth gives the deck another win condition, since if Dark Depths is in play with its 10 counters, you only have to spend 2 green to get the Sloth into play, and this is extra doable thanks to Yavimaya Cradle of Growth, which makes Dark Depths capable of tapping for green mana. The Megalsoth hasn't caught on in every Dark Depths deck in Legacy though, and it doesn't have any top 8 so far in 2025, but because it's basically Hogak in this deck, it's pretty hard to count it out entirely. At number 8, it's Thrasta, Tempest's Roar. It's 10 generic and 2 green for a 7/7 with Trample and Haste, and the unique Trample over Planeswalker's ability, and it has hexproof the turn it enters. Importantly, it also costs 3 less to cast for each other spell cast this turn. So, if you can cast a bunch of cheap spells, Thrasta can come down early and smash in for 7, and your opponent won't even be able to interact with Thrasta until their own turn. So it can come down and kill a Planeswalker, or just do a ton of damage to the opponent very quickly, or a little bit of both. Thrasta is from Modern Horizons 2, and that means the only 60 card formats it's legal in are Modern, Legacy, and Vintage. It's put up top 8s in both Modern and Legacy. In the former, it's been played in Neoform decks where the main plan is to get Allosaurus Rider into play early and cast Neoform to put Gristlebrand in play. This is another deck that uses Nourishing Shoal plus a way to pay life to draw cards, and while Thrasta is a big expensive thing to exile to that to draw more cards with Gristlebrand, Thrasta is also a combo piece that can let you win the game the turn Gristlebrand comes down, because once you've drawn a ton of cards with the Shoal plus expensive green things, you'll also have cast a bunch of cheap spells. So you can cast Thrasta for 2, and then cast a Fortifying Draft, which you will have drawn, on it, which gives +X/+X, which is the life you gain that turn, and obviously after those shoals, that's going to be lethal. Thrasta has also seen play in Legacy Riddlesmith decks. That creature lets you draw a card and discard a card every time you cast an artifact, and the deck is filled with free artifacts that let you rip through your deck, and you can eventually cast a very cheap Thrasta. It definitely has some interesting combo potential, as both of those decks illustrate, but it doesn't have any top 8 since 2023. At number 7, it's Rise of the Eldrazi. For 9 generic and 3 colorless, it's an uncounterable sorcery that destroys target permanent, lets target player draw 4 cards, and gives you an extra turn, and then you exile Rise of the Eldrazi. A 12 mana card should be absolutely game-breaking, especially when it doesn't have a built-in cost reduction effect of some kind, and this one certainly is. It's 1 part removal spell, 1 part time walk, and 1 part souped-up ancestral recall. It's pretty tough to lose the game if you get to a point where you can cast this thing, and that's of course the tricky part. It's from Commander Masters, a set that has limited legality when it comes to 60 card formats. This card is only legal in Legacy and Vintage, but the good news is those are the formats most adept at producing absurd amounts of colorless mana quickly anyway. Its top 8s have all come in Legacy, where Cloud Post decks are capable of producing insane mana incredibly quickly. Each Cloud Post can tap for 1 colorless for each locus on the battlefield, so if you combine it with Glimmer Post, which is another locus, as well as Vesuva, which can copy either of those lands, you can regularly find yourself with 9 mana on turn 3 and 12 on turn 4, so casting Rise of the Eldrazi is very, very doable, especially in a format with tons of powerful land tutors. Rise of the Eldrazi is still seeing play in Legacy Cloudpost decks, but it hasn't achieved a major top 8 since 2024. It also wouldn't be a total shock if it did achieve one before the end of the year, though. At number 6, it's the Cauldron of Eternity. For 10 generic and 2 black, it's a legendary artifact that costs 2 generic less to cast for each creature card in your graveyard. Whenever a creature you control dies, you put it on the bottom of its owner's library, and that's an effect that is mostly meant to balance out the Cauldron because it has a powerful reanimation effect. You can pay 2 generic and a black and tap it, and pay 2 life to reanimate a creature from your graveyard, but only at sorcery speed. So this Cauldron is filled to the brim with graveyard synergy. Since it's easier to cast, the more creatures you have in your graveyard, and then it's an efficient and repeatable way to bring stuff back from the graveyard. Though you'll generally only get to bring things back once, since once it's in play, your creatures go to the graveyard only very briefly before going to the bottom of your library. It has seen some play in Pioneer, where it appeared in Turbo Mill decks that could quickly load the graveyard with Vessel of Nascency and Grizzly Salvage, but it's been more successful in Legacy, where for a time it appeared in that format's Ninja decks. These decks feature lots of creatures and a significant amount of graveyard action, and the Cauldron is a good way to rebuild after a board sweeper, but it's also in the deck because of Yuriko the Tiger's Shadow. When she hits your opponent, you reveal the top card of your library and put that card into your hand, and your opponent loses life equal to that card's mana value, which is 12 with the Cauldron, of course. The deck only usually runs a single Cauldron, but with both Ponder and Brainstorm, you can get the Cauldron on top of your library with surprising consistency when you need to. However, the Cauldron doesn't have any top 8 since 2023. At number 5, it's Enter the Infinite. For 8 generic and 4 blue mana, it's a sorcery that draws cards equal to the number of cards in your library, and then you put a card from your hand on top of your library, and you have no maximum hand size until your next turn. In other words, this is 12 mana to literally draw your entire library. That's certainly an effect that can win you the game, although you do often need to have a plan in your deck to take advantage of things, since if you just spend 12 to draw your whole deck, it might be kind of hard to find a way to go off, but decks in both Pioneer and Legacy have found a way to do that. For example, between 2019 and 2020, it was a big part of Pioneer Lotus Field decks. These decks use that powerful land that can tap for 3 mana at a time, and combine it with effects that let you untap it to produce tons of mana. These decks can then cast Enter the Infinite, and among the cards in their library would be Thassa's Oracle, which will just win you the game when it enters since your library will have 1 card in it. It's also found some more limited success in Possibility Storm decks in Pioneer. When you cast a spell with the Storm in play, you reveal cards until you reveal a card with the same type as that spell, and you can cast that spell for free. The only sorceries these decks run, other than Enter the Infinite, are adventures, like Love-Struck Beast, which aren't seen as sorceries by the Storm. So when you cast one of those, you always hit the sorcery in the deck, Enter the Infinite. It's also been played in a Legacy deck called Omnitel, which combines Enter the Infinite with Show and Tell. While you can't cast Enter the Infinite with Show and Tell, you can place Omniscience on the board, which makes all your spells free. So then, casting Enter the Infinite not only draws your entire library, you can also cast everything too. Unsurprisingly, casting every card in your library in a single turn wins you the game. While Enter the Infinite is still seeing occasional play in both Pioneer and Legacy, it hasn't achieved an actual top 8 since 2023, but this is one of the most powerful sorceries in the entire game, so it's hard to count it out entirely. At number 4, it's Ghalta, Primal Hunger. For 10 generic and 2 green, it's a 12/12 trampler, and it costs X less to cast, where X is the total power of creatures you control. So, if you can get a few efficient creatures on the board, Ghalta can come down quite early, and is certainly a must-kill threat since it can single-handedly end the game in 2 swings. While in Standard, Ghalta saw play in both Mono Green and Jund aggro decks, both of which possessed several creatures which could quickly lower Ghalta's cost. Steel Leaf Champion was the best at this in Mono Green decks, while Rotting Regisaur was the best at it in Jund decks. It's also been played in Pioneer Golgari aggro decks, where mana bases are good enough to run the Champion and the Regisaur together, along with Ronus the Indomitable and Love-Struck Beast, really driving Ghalta's cost down in a hurry. Ghalta even has a single modern top 8 in a Jund aggro deck that could power out Ghalta, but was also pretty happy to discard it to Kragenwick Cremator, a card that does damage equal to the mana value of a randomly discarded creature card. While Ghalta doesn't have any top 8 since 2023, it did get a reprint in Foundations, so it's going to be in Standard for quite a while. And while it hasn't put up a top 8 as a result of that newfound Standard legality, it certainly could over the next several years. At number 3, it's Emrakul the World Anew. For 12 mana, it's a legendary 12/12 Eldrazi, and when you cast it, you gain control of all creatures target player controls. That's already really strong, but she's an absurd Eldrazi, of course, so things don't end there. She also has flying, protection from spells and permanents that were cast this turn, and madness for 6 colorless mana. That means if you discard her, you can pay that alternate cost to cast her, so you can potentially pay only 6 for this game-breaking 12 mana card. There is one sort of downside though. When she leaves the battlefield, you do sacrifice all of your creatures, but this includes the one you stole, and that's way better than giving them back to your opponent. Because she's from Modern Horizons 3, the only 60-card paper formats she's legal in are Modern, Legacy, and Vintage, but even with those restrictions, she's been pretty successful since being printed, especially in Modern, where she quickly found a home in Eldrazi Tron decks. These decks combine the powerful Urza's lands and Eldrazi-specific lands like Eldrazi Temple to cast expensive Eldrazi way ahead of schedule. Between those amazing colorless lands and a discard outlet like the Underworld Cookbook, it's possible to cast Emrakul the World anew as early as turn 3. She's also seen a bit of play in Legacy, where she appears sometimes in the aforementioned Cloudpost deck. She's still putting up regular top 8s in Modern, but it'll probably be tough for her to reach a higher spot on the list since the 2 cards in front of her both have leads and are also quite active. At number 2, it's Scion of Draco. For 12 generic mana, the Scion is a 4/4 artifact creature with flying, and it grants vigilance to your white creatures, hexproof to your blue creatures, lifelink to your black creatures, first strike to your red creatures, and trample to your green creatures. It also costs 2 less mana to cast for each basic land type among lands you control, so in theory, you can end up paying only 2 mana for this. If your board already has some creatures on it, the Scion is pretty likely to drastically improve your ability to attack the turn it comes down to. This is a Modern Horizons 2 card, so the only 60-card paper formats it's legal in are Modern, Legacy, and Vintage, and it's done a ton of work in Modern ever since being printed. It gets particularly absurd alongside Leyline of the Guild pack, which you can put into play for free if it's in your opening hand, and it makes all your non-land permanents all colors, and it makes it so that all your lands are every basic land type. So if you put the Leyline down on turn 0, you can easily cast the Scion on turn 2, and it will give itself and all of your other creatures all of those keywords because they're all colors. This nasty combo is at the center of Modern's domain aggro decks. The Scion is another high mana card that's also played in Modern calibrated blast decks. Scion of Draco is in a great spot to keep gaining points in Modern, and it could threaten to one day be the number 1 card on this list. For now though, that card is Blightsteel Colossus. For 12 generic mana, you get an indestructible 11/11 with Trample and Infect, and if it would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, you reveal it and shuffle it into its owner's library. Infect means the Colossus does damage to creatures in the form of -1/-1 counters, and to players in the form of poison counters, and if a player has 10 or more poison counters, they lose the game on the spot. So obviously, Infect on a creature this huge and hard to deal with is pretty scary, and means you'll have no problem winning you the game in a single swing on many board states. They did go to the trouble of making it so he's hard to reanimate, and this did make it harder for it to find traction in formats like Standard and Modern, but it can still be cheated into play using other methods. In Legacy, artifact decks have put him into play using Ghalta Forge Master or by using Metalworker to produce tons of mana. He's also been put into play with Sneak Attack, which lets you put the Colossus into play with haste for a single swing, and that's usually all you need. In Vintage, there are no shortage of ways to cheat this thing into play, with Oath of Druids and Tinker being the most common ways to do it. The Colossus is played in a ton of Vintage decks as a result. Even Storm decks used to run Tinker and the Colossus as a backup win condition, leading to a fairly massive score in the format. While it's not quite as much of an automatic inclusion as it once was, it does still see regular play in Magic's most powerful format, as it still really hasn't been surpassed in its ability to win the game in a single swing. So, those are Magic's best 12 mana cards. If you'd like to kick off the 12th month of the year with a bunch of 12 mana cards, check out the description where you can find a direct Card Kingdom link for each card that appeared in the video. If you want to make sure you catch future videos, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to catch up on past videos, including many more that look at mana values, you should see a playlist on your screen shortly. Thanks for watching.